Morning, everyone. My name is Laura Colavito. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be going through our Networking 101 presentation today, and we have the privilege of having Amber Lawrence with us today from ABB, who's going to share some of her perspective as well. Just a few logistical notes before we get started. The session is being recorded, and we will share these slides and a copy of the recording with you after the presentation. So if there's information on a slide that we don't get to in too much detail, just know that you'll be able to have that for reference once the presentation's over. And also, we're going to be kind of tag teaming throughout the presentation. I will be monitoring the Q&A box, which is one of the sections. So if you could please make sure to direct all of your questions to that Q&A box rather than to the event chat. It's a lot easier for me to keep track of things there and make sure we're getting to all of your questions. And so with that, I'll let Amber introduce herself before we get started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Amber Lawrence. I am the Early Talent Internship Program Manager here at ABB. For those of you who aren't familiar with ABB, don't worry, we have an inside joke here that we are the largest company nobody knows about. So really excited that we're able to engage with you today, because then you can't say you've never heard of ABB before. But we are a large global engineering and technical company, and I run our intern program there. So we offer a lot of early talent programs that I'm involved with, as well as all university relations. So super excited to be a part of the conversation today. Networking is one of my favorite things, so looking forward to your questions and making sure we're covering all the things that you guys are hoping to get out of this.
Great, thank you. And so before we get started today, I'm going to launch a couple of polls just so we have a better sense of where you are in terms of your networking knowledge, and also where you are in your academic. So first poll is launched. If we could get some responses in, just what year are you in school? That's going to give us a sense of, maybe how much familiarity you have with networking, whether that's going to be in-person events or through online connection. Leave that open for about 30 seconds. Okay, we got a pretty good spread. We've got a good number of grad students with us today and a pretty even split across the undergrads as well. Wonderful. The next thing, and I'm going to launch another poll, but in addition to this question, if you can go ahead into the Q&A and let us know what it is you're hoping to get out of this presentation. Have specific questions or certain areas of networking that you're especially interested in, go ahead and let us know. A lot of it may be covered through the slides, but if we know ahead of time, we can make sure that we're addressing those needs. But generally speaking, what best represents your needs right now? You need to know how to get started, how to identify potential contacts, how to stay organized and keep track of all of it. You need to know what to say, or all of the above. My favorite catch-all. Okay, a lot of all of the above. Most of you seem like you're going to be pretty organized. Great, so we've got about 20%, what should I do to get started? 20%, what do I say? About 46%, all of the above. So we will try to make sure we cover all of those areas. So without further ado, what you will learn today. We're going to talk about what is networking, why networking is important, and how to build your network. We're going to talk about conducting outreach, how to go through, small talk, which is fun for some, not so fun for others, how to conduct informational interviews and stay in touch with your contacts after you've made an initial conversation. We're going to talk about some in-person and online networking tips. And then lastly, we'll host a Q&A. We will pause as we go through the slides, every few slides, to address questions. So if you put a question in and it's not immediately being addressed, maybe we're going to cover that material later in the presentation, or we'll get to those sort of as we have a natural breaking. So getting started, what is networking? I think a lot of people have these misconceptions around networking that, it's this fake relationships, that you're manipulating someone, that you're trying to get something out of people, or you're trying to, take advantage of people. There's also a misconception that you have to be hugely extroverted. Maybe it's easier for people who are naturally extroverted, but it's certainly not a requirement to do it well. The other sort of fearful thing is that, it requires you to go to these huge networking events and be really sort of on your toes to take advantage of that. And then the last thing is that it's only for people who are already privileged and well connected. And those things certainly can be true in some cases, but at its best, networking is just connecting you with people who interest you and have careers that may interest you. It's having just a genuine conversation about others' work experience to help you with any career decisions that you're facing. I've certainly found this to be true. Most people are extremely flattered and happy to talk about their experiences. For most people on, the both ends of the spectrum, one-on-one conversations are really easy once you get down to that part, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. You might need to do a little bit more preparation for some people to be comfortable in that situation. But it's not something that needs to be this big, daunting experience. And then the last thing is, you never know what's going to come out of that. You're going to develop friendships, potentially mentors, through the process of networking that can benefit your career both now and in the long term. So what are the benefits of networking? There's a survey that revealed that 85% of jobs are found through networking. And thinking about that, it's not just your first job or your first career move, but it's also going to come in handy for your second, third, fourth, and fifth career move. Amber and I were just speaking before we launched the presentation. I never thought about it in this way before, but after my first job, all of my jobs have been found through my network. So it really is something that's going to influence the opportunities that are presented to you through the course of your career. It's an excellent way to learn more about careers and different industries through experience, and get a better sense of whether they're going to be a good fit for you. You don't necessarily have to actually go work in a company or in an industry to get a good sense of that. You can have those informational interviews and conversations to kind of assess that prior to going down a path. And it's important to remember it's a two-way street. So you are also going to have things of value to share with other people. So be sure to offer help when you're asked. When the shoe is on the other foot a few years from now and you're in your first job or in your first internship and a student is looking for assistance and your help, remember where you are now. Remember how valuable those people that helped you were. So it's important to kind of return the favor when you have that opportunity. By building your network, you're basically creating an army of job seekers. So you're not the only person looking for opportunities. You have this network in place, then there are people who are looking on your behalf. Maybe they hear of an opportunity and they say, hey, I know you were looking for an internship. I saw this come up. Are you interested? And so it sort of helps you not only get information from that individual, but from their network as well. And then lastly, it helps you learn someone's story. Again, you're building relationships. So you can find out about their academic experience, their personal experience, their professional experience. You never know what information is going to be gleaned from that. So how do you build your network? You already have a lot more people in your network than you think, even if you're just getting started. So whether that is classmates in your program, outside of your program at Georgia Tech, whether it's faculty or graduate students who you have connected with through coursework or research, whether it's students who you are in clubs or other student organizations with, all of these people are going to comprise your network. Even if they are only involved in student organizations at this point, if you think about that relationship over the long term in 5, 10 years, it's going to expand greatly and their experiences are going to expand greatly. So start with where you are and then work outward. So if you have a small community, if you're not a member of certain organizations, think about how to grow that. So the Georgia Tech Alumni Association, advantage of the Mentor Jackets organization or a professional organization for your industry. Good to use a variety of platforms and methods, so both in your classes, in your extracurriculars, through LinkedIn, by networking with employers who are coming to campus specifically to meet with students, so information sessions, career fairs. And then it's important to try to embrace the process. It sounds like a lot of work, and in some ways it can be, but it's also well worth the effort. And once you sort of build that muscle, it becomes a lot simpler.
Can I add one thing here too, Laura?
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, because I feel like how you mentioned, you already have a network, right? Even if you're not thinking that you do. So even think beyond your Georgia Tech community. You know, if you're a junior, senior in grad school, like, do your parents' friends know your major and what you want to do? Do their neighbors know, right? Do your friends' parents know? Because think of all of the connections that those people have as well, and they can help not get you an internship or a job, right? Because networking is never, hey, here's an opportunity, there it is, right? You have to still build that relationship. You have to show up. You have to get the job yourself. But you can use that network to connect you with opportunities. So think even outside of that, right? Do people know what you're looking for? Is that well known amongst your friends, family, et cetera? Because that's a great way to start connecting with that community as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then also to the point earlier that, well, you're thinking, well, I'm not well connected. My parents aren't working in an industry that I'm interested in. I can remember feeling that as a college student. My father was a mailman. My mom was an elementary school teacher, and I had friends in college whose parents worked in finance in New York City or worked in sales or consulting businesses and just had a lot better network built in terms of their parents' professional experiences. But it doesn't mean that you can't take advantage of those things. So I was able to sort of, network with my peers through supervisors that I'd met at internships. I networked with some of my professors and was able to tap into some of their networks in terms of looking for job opportunities. So maybe you have a little bit more work to do if you don't have parents or family that is already well connected in an industry that you're trying to work. But it's certainly doable, and it really isn't that much extra work to sort of get that started. So let me advance our slides here. How do you get started? So the first thing you need to do is set a goal. Have a clear goal in mind or a clear direction for your outreach. So is it that you want to learn more about careers in consulting or another specific industry? Is it that you're looking at a couple of internships and you want to get feedback from peers who have already gone through internships? Is it that you're thinking about grad school or you're weighing grad school versus entry-level jobs, looking at students who have gone into those grad programs and getting some around their decision making? You need to prioritize your outreach. So obviously there's a whole wide world of people out there, but it's important to spend a little bit of time and to set aside a little bit of time each day or each week to researching people of interest and to sort of navigating this networking process. And it's important to develop a method to stay organized. So whether that's setting reminders via calendar invites on your online calendars, whether it's your own to-do list and setting aside a few hours each week whenever you can fit it in. Also having a method to document notes from calls and outreach that you've made so that you can keep track of where you are in that process. The first thing you need to do is define a target network. So as you have identified your goal, once you have that in mind, so in this case, management consulting career, you need to identify a target network. So students are always going to be sort of that lowest hanging fruit. You're going to have the most access to fellow students, and they are going to have the most time available on their end to potentially be able to connect and respond to you. Beyond that, recent alums are the next best thing because they remember being in your shoes a few years ago, and they also have really good perspective because they're only a few years into the job, so they have relatable experiences to share. They remember what their process was as they were job searching and what they have learned through their first few years. Then you build an outreach list, and this is legitimately a list or a spreadsheet. We'll have a sample in a minute about how you might organize that. You need to list out the people that you're interested in meeting with. There is a way in LinkedIn to export your contacts if it's LinkedIn that you're working from, to build a spreadsheet out and then add columns as necessary to manage your outreach. Once you have that list together of people you want to connect with, go ahead and start doing outreach. We don't have a number in mind, but understand that you're not going to get a response to every message that you send. So it's better if you can have sort of a good chunk of people to start with, maybe 5 to 10, where you are going ahead and sending some outreach messages and hoping that you can get some feedback. You can do LinkedIn messages, send an email, you can reach out by phone to contacts that, maybe parents, friends, or neighbors who, outside of this online networking world. And then ultimately you want to schedule a 15 to 20-minute phone call to hear more about their experience. Make sure you take good notes during that so you can send a thank you note and then follow up on any specific things that you talked about during that conversation. So the more information you have about that conversation, the more likely you are to be able to follow up 3 months from now to say, hey, I saw this article about this topic that we talked about a few months ago. It made me think of you. I hope you're doing well. Here's where I am on my job search process. And so we have a little bit more information about that later in the presentation. But that's sort of how you would go through the steps. Amber, you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's an awesome overview there. And I think to your point about, not always having people reach out, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation too, more in depth, but just being understanding that I think more times than not, people will get back to you. It might not be right away. I'll speak from my experience. During fall semester, my inbox, and don't even talk to me about my LinkedIn inbox, right? It is a little neglected because, being in campus recruiting world, it's a really busy time, right? And that's going to be a lot of the people that you're networking with from an employer perspective. So just being mindful of that. It might not be to ignore you. It could just be the timing of things. So being a little bit patient, while still, of course, holding people, accountable, or, if they've said they've reached out to you, right, you can follow up, and we'll talk more about that as we keep going. But I think in that initial outreach, don't get flustered or, discouraged if immediately you don't get that response, because it's likely that you will. It just might be a little bit more delayed depending on the time of year that you're reaching out.
So here's an example of an outreach. So you're going to have companies that you want to reach out with to. This is one way to organize it. And then you see these contact groups across the top. So you have one way to organize it, and this process was shared with us by a former employee who has an MBA and is a real guru in terms of her online networking guidance. And so she had a process of timing her outreach, and she would reach out to contact group 1, to everyone who was in that column, because she didn't want to be reaching out to the same company, to multiple contacts all at the same time. So you, again, you start with your best chance of response by your closest group of contacts first, and you go ahead and do an outreach. And maybe you time yourself to say, okay, I'm reaching out today on Tuesday to my contact group 1. I'm going to give that a week and a half or 2 weeks, and then I'm going to go ahead and schedule something on my calendar 2 weeks out to follow up with anyone I haven't heard yet. And that way you're staying on top of things, and not letting things slip through the cracks. And you're also able to realize, who you've reached out to when, so that you're not inundating people. So this is just meant to be a kind of visual example of how you might organize that information. Obviously, getting up to contact group 15 is pretty ambitious. Don't feel like that is where you're going to be at the end of your week 1 of research for contacts. This is a long-term thing, and I would focus on quality over quantity to some degree. Having 15 different contacts at an organization is not as valuable as having 1 or 2 close contacts that you really maintain relations. And so here's the spreadsheet I referenced. Again, just a sample of how you might stay organized, especially as you go through job searching and actually applying. It's important to keep track of those job description links, of company websites, so you can do your research, and contacts there. So this is a good way to keep track of that. This person has color coded by industry, which is helpful if you're looking across a number of different areas, and just keeping track of deadlines as well. So now we're going to switch gears into conducting outreach. I'm just going to take a look quickly at the Q&A before we move forward to see if there's anything that we've already covered that you guys have questions on. Okay, so one question is, I think I'm going to table that for a little bit later. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna table our questions for a little bit later. I think we're going to get to some of that content here in conducting outreach, and we will get in more detail in a little bit if you guys need that. All right. So this is just a quick logistical how-to of how to make connections using LinkedIn. If you go to the Georgia Institute of Technology institution LinkedIn page, there's a tab for alumni where, as you can see, 190,000 alumni profiles are linked into the page. From that, you can search by keyword, you can filter by, see where this next section is highlighted, to filter by what they studied, the industry they're working in, the company they work in, what part of the United States they live in. There's a lot of search filters available there. You can also search by graduation date. Again, if you're targeting students or alums who are within their first 2 to 3 years after graduation. I will go ahead and tell you that the search process is not as clean as we would like it to be, because LinkedIn is searching everything in a student's profile or an alum's profile. So even if you filter by grad year, 2016 to 2019, you're going to get people who are matching grad years from high school or undergrad at a different university, and they got their grad degree at Georgia Tech. So it's not going to be a perfect filter. I think keywords might work a little bit better, but again, that's going to be searching through a lot of different areas of someone's profile. So you will have to do a little bit of combing through to sort of find that perfect fit. But this is a good way to access a lot of potential connections who are already in your network as a fellow Georgia Tech alum. I'm going to let Amber share a little bit more. Obviously, in her role, she is very often on the receiving end of this. So we wanted to let her share her personal experience and give you guys some insight around best practices for actually conducting your outreach.
Yes, thank you. And I like on this example here, you see an invite to connect on LinkedIn. I think this is the best way, especially when you're using LinkedIn, to kind of start that conversation, right? You're asking for that connection, but you're also giving them a little bit of why you're reaching out, right? A little introduction of who you are and why you'd like to connect with this person. So I think that this is a great way. It doesn't take a lot from you in terms of it's not a long email, right? It's a short and sweet note, sharing like for the example of an alumni, right? Hey, I saw you went to Georgia Tech as well. We were in some of the same organizations. Would love to hear a little bit about your experience after graduation. Maybe you're reaching out to an employer. Hey, saw that you guys are hiring for a certain role, and really interested in this company and what you guys are doing. I had a few questions about XYZ, right? It can be something that is very short and sweet. Have a clear action item. I think that is good for email, LinkedIn, anything. If somebody sends me a connection with a note, hey Amber, great seeing you on that presentation, excited to connect. My response will be, thanks for the connection, right? If you don't give me an action item that you want to have about a 15-minute phone conversation, I'm going to be so quick moving through messages. I'm not going to think to say, oh, well, let me suggest this, right? So always have an action item with your message, whether that's LinkedIn or email. I think it's very good to be very clear about that. And then you see on here, right, ask for less time than you want. So about 15 minutes. If you guys are chatting, that could go over a little bit, of course. And then once you do connect with that person, you heard earlier, take notes throughout. That's super, super important because it's really exciting from the recruiter's end and shows interest of a candidate when they're like, hey, last time we talked, we discussed this, and I looked a little bit more into it, and I found, I researched XYZ, right? Like building on the conversation from the recruiting side of it, it really shows that candidate's interest, that they're really wanting to know more and they're actively listening, which is one of those soft skills that recruiters and hiring managers look for. That's something that you can't teach as easily, right? And so those soft skills coming out of the university in an early talent perspective is more important a lot of the time, right? You're going to be trained, you're going to learn those things. So showing that you have these soft skills are really going to help you shine. So I would definitely make sure that you are taking the time for that and following up with that thank you note. Everybody loves a thank you note. It makes my day. I'm like, oh, how kind, right? Anything you want to add there, Laura, to that as well in terms of examples?
No, I think that was great. Really good to hear your perspective there because I know you are certainly on the receiving end of this.
Yes, absolutely. And then with email too, same thing. It's going to be a little bit more lengthy. You have the formatting, the visual aspect of it, the amount of characters it allows you. LinkedIn is much shorter. Email, you have a little bit more of an opportunity to throw something in there. This doesn't need to be a cover letter, right? I think that you still want to be mindful of the length because, again, people are getting a lot of emails, right? So you want to keep it short and sweet, but be able to kind of highlight some things about yourself. Start that pitch, right? That elevator pitch, who you are, what you're looking for out of the conversation. Do you want just a little bit more insight into a certain role? Do you want to have an informational interview where you hear about what that person does, right? Give them a little bit of just insight into what you'd like out of the conversation. Ask for the action item. You see here in this example, I'm available these days. Would that maybe work for you? Or asking for them to send their availability. I like the idea of offering up some of your availability first. As you guys have some of these conversations, you'll see there can be a few emails back and forth about availability alone. Because when you just say, hey, what's your availability? Someone's going to be like, well, goodness, I mean, I have a few blocks here and there, right? So it can take some time to narrow down what really works for two people. So I like this example of sharing, some consistent times you're available, let them know on the forefront what that looks like, and then asking them to see what works best for them too. So always make it personalized, right? Don't send a blanket one. that's going to hurt you, especially if you're messaging multiple people within the company, because a lot of the time, if so for example, if you were to message somebody at ABB, one of our managers that is over a team that you're interested in, they're going to send that right to me, right? They're going to say, hey, Amber, this person's interested in an internship. You take the reins from here. So for me, if you sent me that same message, and then I'm going to see that that was a copy and paste, right? And I'm not saying that I'm going to be like, oh, nope, not reaching out, right? That's not the case. I think it just doesn't set up the best first impression. It's worth taking the time to personalize each message, especially when it's multiple people in the same company, because they'll find out.
Absolutely. We have another just sample here. Again, some of these are just meant to be for reference. I think both of these examples, it's helpful to notice that the student has included information about themselves in their email signature. So you may not be attaching your resume to this like you would for a job application, but it is really helpful to make sure you're including some of that information about where you are in the process, so that you're, giving them some context for where you are in your academic as well. So that is a sample of reaching out to an alum at an organization that you might be applying to a position with. What do we have here? So some general recommendations around seeking advice. Again, we just wanted to share some templates and then how you would follow up to that if you're not hearing a response. I think Amber's point earlier, this is certainly a busy time of year for hiring, but it may be a busy time of year as well, depending on their academic schedules. So it's okay to follow up and just acknowledge that you understand that time is of the essence in terms of their availability, because the more polite you are, the more understanding you are, the more likely they are to want to follow up with you when they have the chance.
Add a quick note too. I'm so sorry, Laura.
Oh,
One, we do have a question in here that I think might be helpful with what you were just discussing. So somebody was asking if now's a busy hiring time out of the year, a company closing out their hiring. I think that is very depending on the industry you're interested in, your major, the size of the company sometimes. So I never want to say, and Laura, I definitely want you to chime in if you feel differently here. I don't know that there is a end all be all to timelines for companies. I think that it is pretty across the board a very busy time for all companies right now, though. I think the fall is always going to be busier from an employer perspective than spring. But that's not to say that it won't go into spring as well, right? But a lot of companies will likely have offers and whatnot before the end of the year, depending on the company, again, the size of the company, the type of role. Internships and full-time roles could be different for some companies. But for ABB's perspective, we are actively interviewing and hiring, sending out offers for both internships and our early talent rotational programs or, post-grad positions right now. So it's definitely a very busy time of year. This is kind of when all of those interviews and whatnot are going down.
yeah, for sure. And I think, that changes year to year as well. It used to be that a lot of full-time hiring happened in the fall and internships more happened in the spring, but over the last 10 or so years, that has certainly gotten pushed earlier. More and more companies are also hiring interns. Once you get into December, in terms of new opportunities coming through, it tends to slow down a lot by mid-December. There's not necessarily a lot of action on things tend to just sort of hit pause and then pick up again after the holidays. But people are also going to be busy with their own family obligations and, holiday season, time out of the office. So even though it's less from a recruiting and hiring perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean people have a lot of extra time on their schedule. But yeah, I think it is going to vary a lot depending on the size of company. I tend to think the larger the company, the more likely that fall is their heavy season, but that doesn't mean they're not also going to be posting. When I recruited for Deloitte, we had a busy season from about, the start of the semester through Thanksgiving was our really heavy time. And then it started again the start of the spring semester through about spring break. And that was, getting hundreds of emails a day, kind of conducting a lot of interviews. We had a lot going on during the time. So again, it's really going to vary based on the company.
100%. And remember that pro tip, never ask for a job. I just want to reiterate that one more time. Even if, say, you go and talk to Laura and she's like, I got this awesome employer. I know they're hiring for something that you are looking for. Make sure when you reach out to that employer, you're not like, hey, so Laura told me you've got a job for me, right? When are we getting this going? Networking is not equal a job. It does not equal a slam dunk, you are in the door. It is just helping you get through the first door of a conversation. You still have to show up, right? It's helping you essentially get your resume in front of someone maybe, but it is not beyond that. You have to do the work. You have to build the relationship. You have to do the research. You have to be ready for that interview and prepare, right? So always come at it from a informational standpoint, getting information, having more conversation, never just be like, so I'm ready, when do I start? Because as much as we giggle about it, that happens. I've gotten those emails before and I have to kind of be like, that's not how this works, right? And it can be uncomfortable. So never assume you have a job, never ask for a job, always come at it from more questioning and curiosity mindset.
Absolutely. So next we have just what I was referencing earlier in terms of tracking your outreach follow-up. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is certainly a very advanced way to go about it. And if this is too intimidating for you, you don't need to schedule it quite as down to the date as this is suggesting. But if it helps you stay organized, this is a good way to make sure that things aren't falling through the cracks. I think the best way to approach networking is the slow and steady wins the race idea. If you reach out to 50 people, it's going to be logistically hard for you to manage actually scheduling the potential informational interviews or conversations that might come out of 50 emails. So pace yourself so that you're able to actually build relationships with the people that you're reaching out to, and make sure you're budgeting time for yourself to do that. And whatever that looks like for your schedule and how you want to manage it. Again, this is a way that our LinkedIn guru that was formerly with us recommended outreach. And this is something that she recommended to more, senior level employees who are maybe manager level who are really actively seeking outreach during a higher level job search. But it's absolutely something that if this floats your boat, that students can take advantage of, but I also don't want it to. So just a potential organization tactic there. So we talked about non-responses, and Amber mentioned that, you're not going to hear back from everybody, and that's okay. And she also touched on that, people generally want to respond to you. And so it is okay to go ahead and follow up once or twice, but after that point, just give it a break. Maybe they're in a very busy season. Maybe they'll get to it in a month or two, but it's important not to burn bridges potentially by conducting outreach endlessly with someone who just doesn't have the time. Adding 4 to 5 messages to their inbox at some point is just not going to help. We suggest that you don't reach out to multiple people at the organization at the same time. I think you could, if you're being thoughtful, as Amber said, to be really specific in your outreach. Make sure you're sending an individualized message to each of the contacts that you're reaching out to so that it is tailored to them personally and you're not showing these templates. If you find that you're not having success with a certain organization, maybe it's just not the right fit. Maybe they don't have the time or capacity to engage with networking right now. Maybe they don't have any hiring needs and aren't motivated to kind of engage with potential talent. So maybe it's time to move on to another department with that company or another organization that might have more interest in identifying talent. I'm going to pause here. We have had some good questions come through the chat. We will get to these slides in just a minute. I know small talk can be a little bit difficult for some people, but I just want to go through some of these quickly. How do you develop or make new relationships that can help you land a job? Can you explain in some details the major steps in this process? That was from the beginning of the presentation. I think we have probably answered that a little bit, and we'll talk to some of these more, actionable steps in just a few minutes. But if the person who asked that question, if you have any specific follow-ups or if we didn't answer it, please just clarify and post another question. I'd like to make connections with professors remotely to increase my chances of getting a postdoc position. What is the best way to approach and tailor my email? I'm a grad student. I think just understanding who you're reaching out to is important to, if they have work that you're interested in getting involved in, share your interest in their specific work, share a little bit about how your experience might relate to that work. Again, I think it's important to be relatively brief in terms of your initial outreach, but just, try to appeal to common interests in terms of where your overlap is between your experience and qualifications and what they could potentially benefit from in the work that they're doing.
With that too, I would recommend if it's remotely, ask them if they would be willing to do like a video call with you. Networking remotely is definitely more challenging because you don't have the face-to-face, right? You're not able to read body language as easily. So anytime that you can be on video when you're engaging, and even if it is these one-on-one conversations, if they're willing to do that with you, that's going to help you bridge more of a relationship, I think, and start getting more of that conversation going than just over email and phone. So I would suggest maybe asking for that. If they don't feel comfortable, of course, right, adjust. But I would initially, request, would you be willing to jump on a video, 15-minute video call with me so I can introduce myself more and, be able to learn more about you and try that way first and foremost.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Another question, should you include your expected year of graduation at the bottom of the email? I typically would think yes. And Amber, you can probably speak to your process a little bit, but in my experience, I had various hiring needs based on various class years of students. And so it's helpful for categorizing who you would be as a potential candidate when you're engaging with employers in terms of where you might potentially fit in with their hiring program. I don't know what your experience is, Amber. What would you say to that?
I fully agree with that. And I would even say on your resume, put expected year of graduation, not like till present. I am great at a lot of things. Math is not one of them. And so counting years, right, to try to guess when you graduate. I know from my experience, I went from a community college to a four-year institution where then I wasn't a traditional 4 years, right? It's much easier for us, for our brains to just see expected graduating here, and then I can say, awesome, they want to know about internships. Or I can say, okay, awesome, they want full-time roles. And that helps me prepare for the conversation with you better as well.
Amber, this next question I think might be good to hear your perspective on. So do recruiters actually pull transferable skills from resumes, or is it just a keyword search on resumes and checking off check boxes that a candidate satisfies a skill that's explicitly mentioned?
That's a great question. And I'll preface, I'm going to answer this from my perspective, right? And just from what I do, and this isn't speaking for everyone. I think every recruiter has a way that they look through resumes and a flow of how they do things. So it could be different. For me, I'm going to want to hear about your transferable or soft skills more than I want to see them, right? You can put excellent communicator on there, but I'm not going to know that you're an excellent communicator until I call you on the phone and we're talking and I see that you're an excellent communicator, right? Or you say like time management. Okay, great. But in my interview, I'm going to have a question that's a behavioral question where my goal is to hear these skills uncovered in example, right? And more action behind it. Because I think while it's great that you indicate these on a resume, for me, for soft skills, you can't just write it, right? So that's why my initial interview with everybody is behavioral. It's learning about your strengths, right? It's learning about how you handle problems, how you work in a team, how you step up to be a leader in certain situations. How do you organize your day? So that's going to show me more in action by what you do and how you respond to situations. If you are good with time management, right? If you're deadline driven, I'm going to get all of those through the behavioral questions more than what you write on your resume.
Yeah,
I hope that answered that too.
That's really great feedback. And I think, to your point about rather than reading, communication skills, I think to some degree what experiences you choose to include on your resume are going to communicate what experience you have in that. So, if you have chaired an event or, conducted presentations at a conference, then that is going to indicate that you have some public speaking experience, you have some strong communication skills. You don't have to just say strong communication skills or leadership skills. By including activities that you've done where you've exhibited those skills, you are implying that you possess those. That doesn't necessarily meet the needs of an automatic tracking system or an applicant tracking system that might be conducting a keyword search, but I think those things are generally sussed out. All right, great, thank you. What else do we have? Say you've networked with people in a company and gotten past the initial conversations to the point where a recruiter where they point you to apply. Is it a good idea to follow up and let them know when you actually do apply? What would you think, Amber?
I think if you've had some initial conversations, this is a person that you've connected with a few times, and they're saying, hey, I need you to I want you to go apply to this. I think it doesn't hurt to say, hey, I've applied. They may even say, if you're a candidate that they've talked to, they may say, hey, I need you to go apply to this. Let me know when you're done so we can then get this next thing scheduled, right? I would look and ask for clarification sometimes on that. If it's someone that you meet at a career fair once and they encourage you to go apply to the posting, I don't know that you necessarily have to do that. I think it's very circumstantial of when you would need to. And the reason I say that, I think, is because from my experience, we get a lot of applications every single day. And so if everybody emailed me who applied every day, I would never get to see anything but that, right? That would be my inbox. So I think it's very circumstantial. I think typically for an application piece, if a recruiter wants you to tell them, they'll say, hey, send me a quick note once you've applied so I can look for it. But if they don't say that, I would say apply. If you don't hear any feedback from them in like a week or so, they're not following up with you on your application, then it might be that time with the follow-up, right? Hey, really liked what we were talking about this position. I was able to apply, was just curious if there was any expectations of the timeline or something like that. I think that could be appropriate, but I don't know if you necessarily have to do that right when you apply. How do you feel, Laura? Do you feel differently there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, logistically, if you emailed every company directly when you submitted an application, I don't think that would be productive. But if you have had multiple conversations with someone, especially if it's maybe, a team member rather than the hiring manager or the recruiter, yeah, it's absolutely worth letting them know because they may be advocating on your behalf internally with the hiring manager or with recruiter. And so I think that's definitely worth following up if it's someone as you described that you actually have a relationship with already. Definitely don't think it's necessary unless a recruiter has asked you to email a recruiter when you apply, because they get all the applications, so they will find your application for sure. Last question before we jump into these slides, and again, Amber, I think this is going to be best for you. Do you recommend settings on LinkedIn profiles indicating open to work? I feel like there's a psychology behind it. Is there a template to post about being open to work, and what are your thoughts there?
I think 100% put there. So when you go on LinkedIn, right, you can say open to work, you can put the types of roles that you're interested in, the locations. As a recruiter, when you're sourcing, those are the first people you go to, right? Because you know that they are more receptive and open to positions. So that will open you to companies who are doing outreach of their own, right? I think LinkedIn is your digital resume. It is how people can look at you and see your experience, whether you know they are or not. So I think putting open to work is a great way to say, hey, I'm on the job market. I'm open to hearing from recruiters about roles. You may get some roles that you're not interested in when you do this. I always suggest always respond to a recruiter, even if you aren't interested. There's a very nice, polite way to say, thank you so much for thinking of me. This isn't the best fit for myself and my experiences, but if anybody in my network is interested, I'll be sure to let you know. Great way to build a relationship, right? You're kind of teaming up there, giving them something, and then that way, maybe down the road, you mention, hey, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for finance. And then next week, that recruiter gets a finance position. Maybe they circle back with you, right? So I think be aware that when you do that, you may get some roles you're not interested in. Respond, keep those polite conversations, but it's a great way to let people know that you are open to hearing what's out there in addition to that you're applying, if that makes sense. I feel like I got a little wordsy there, but.
Yeah, that's great. And I just got a great question. I want to make sure we get through our slides and try to stay on time, but I hear about bias when recruiters evaluate resumes. Good or bad idea to include a headshot photo on your resume? And I will say, in terms of our career center guidance, we typically recommend no headshots on resumes, but do you have thoughts to share there?
I also recommend no. And a big thing for that, I think for some companies, compliance, that's an issue, right? Too. So sometimes, and every company is a little different. That's never been a personal circumstance within anywhere that I've worked, but I have a large network of recruiters that I know as well. And I've heard some of the big companies say, we will not look at a resume if it has a photo on it. So I would just say no. Don't let it even potentially hurt you.
Yeah. All right. So getting into small talk. Amber, this is definitely going to be your wheelhouse, I think, in this section. So just generally speaking, how would you recommend students approach in-person networking with people, whether that's career fairs, networking events, information sessions, that kind of thing?
Yes, small talk's my favorite, which is so weird. But as an employer, we know that these are uncomfortable sometimes, right? We know for some of you, this networking event may be the first ever networking event you've ever been to. And so for me, I love the small talk part because I think it's able to break down some walls and make everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. So think of it first and foremost through that lens that this isn't just a box you have to check. You don't have to be like, hey, da, 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 da. Okay, good, we did that. Now back down to business, right? Like use this as a moment to break the ice and give yourself a moment to breathe, right? Give yourself a moment to not feel as nervous and to realize that that person on the other side of the booth or the front of the information session, person, right? And they are there to hire. Think of it through that lens. They are there to meet you, to hire awesome people. So taking some of the pressure off it, I think, is something that small talk really does a great job of. And you see some great suggestions here of questions. What brought you here? right? Or, how did you get involved in the work that you're doing? I'm really interested in what you're doing. I, heard you talk a little bit about it in this presentation. And how'd you get involved in that? What is some things that you've been working on recently? Tell me about your day to day. Another thing I always like to say for small talk, because I think you should always have a moment of relationship building in small talk, even in interviews. Don't jump on that interview like, let's get to business. I am this major, da, 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 right? Take a moment, build a relationship, because relationship building, no matter what field you go into, what position you go into, relationship building is a part of everything that you will do for the rest of your life, right? Whether you're building a relationship with your manager, your teammates, stakeholders, clients, vendors, you name it, you're always going to build relationships. So in an interview, that's important. Maybe you're in a video interview and you see they've got a Georgia Tech flag or something behind them, right? Awesome. Hey, did you go, I looked you up on LinkedIn before this interview, saw you went to Georgia Tech and seeing the Georgia Tech in the background. I love it. Where was your favorite place to go near campus when you were at school? Or I don't know. I just made that up. Maybe that's not the best one, but something to create connection, right? That's a really big piece of small talk, is making connection and building a relationship. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I love hearing that from you. I think something that we try to emphasize through the Career Center is that you're having conversation. So I like that you made the point to say see it as an opportunity to really build relationships with people and enjoy those conversations. So I again love hearing that from you. We have a few slides in here that are just some sort of sample templates of how you might introduce yourself. Again, we try to avoid the idea of scripting yourself, but these are just some phrasing that you could potentially use to convey some of your experiences. Notes at the bottom here, it's important to turn things back over. So even once you get past the small talk phase and you're, giving a little bit more of a pitch to someone that you're talking to, maintain that conversation, ask questions about them as well throughout so that it's not just a one-sided conversation. Talking about informational interviews, we have a little bit of an idea of, or an example here of some conversations that you could have during an informational interview. I don't know if you might have any additional thoughts to share on guidance for informational interviews.
I was looking through this earlier. I feel like this has a really good start for these questions. So I don't have too much to add here. I think the biggest thing is just be curious, right? And ask smart questions. And this is a great place to go for some start there. So nothing too much to add. For timing, I won't ramble at you.
Yeah. So apologies for those of you who need to hop off. Just thinking about staying in touch. I mean, Amber noted on that earlier, she loves to hear the follow-up. So if you can reference that, are there any other, recommendations that you'd give around ways to stay in touch or potentially, re-engage a contact that you haven't been in contact with for a while?
Oops, sorry, Laura. Were you asking me a question there? Mine went out for a second.
Oh, sorry. I think I lost you for a second. Just if we have some examples here of how you might reach out to folks, but do you have any specific advice around conducting outreach for someone that you might not have had contact with for a while to sort of reignite a conversation potentially?
Yes, no, great question. Yeah, and I apologize. I think I glitched there. First of all, I love this art, asking for book or article recommendations. One, I'm going to say that that's always a great question. When I hear that, it shows me interest. It shows me that you're interested in professional development, in growing. Managers love that. So I think that that's a wonderful suggestion there, by the way. I just wanted to echo that. In addition, if it's somebody who you haven't talked with in a while, right, and you're trying to re-engage that, look at their LinkedIn, see if they've posted something recently, right? Maybe there's a cool article they've shared, or they just shared that their office was doing something really neat to celebrate, something going on that month, right? Or maybe they have an initiative to support some causes that you're really interested and excited and passionate about. I think that's a great way to be relevant, reignite the conversation. Hey, I saw on LinkedIn that, your team and this company are doing, conference supporting XYZ. This is actually something that I've recently been looking into getting involved in and would love to just pick your brain and catch up and see how this event went. Bring some timeliness to it still, but it's not like an awkward, hey, been a while, what's going on, right? You have more of a purpose and you're giving them that action item still. So I think that's a great way. Use those resources to kind of tap into what's relevant for that person at that time.
Yeah, I love that tip. So I know we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to kind of skip through a lot of these. These are just some, benefits of engaging with your network versus just doing cold job applications online. Um, some thoughts about in-person networking versus online. Again, you'll have these slides. I think it is relevant in this time, but again, I loved Amber's suggestion. If you are having to do virtual outreach, try to schedule those video conferences rather than just emails or phone calls to try to really develop that, mimic that in-person relationship building as best you can. And so just thinking about some next steps, we talked through how to approach this, but kind of it's a cyclical process, right? You're constantly going to be evolving your target outreach based on the way that your goals change over time based on your job experiences. Maybe you thought you were going into consulting, you do a consulting internship and decide that that's not for you. You're going to be starting again depending on what your goals are in terms of the types of professional opportunities you are investigating. So it's a bit of a cyclical process that you'll engage in throughout your. Just some additional tips. These concentric circles kind of show examples of how you're going to build out your network, starting with those closest contacts first. And then the tell me about yourself conversation. We talk about this in a lot of our presentations. This is something that you're going to use to introduce yourself to recruiters. But I think, listening to Amber's points earlier, it's important to make these things conversational. You don't want to just get down to business and spit out your qualifications to someone. That's not going to be the best way to kind of foster these relationships. So you don't have to go too far outside of your professional experiences, but a little bit of small talk and relationship building goes a long way. And so any questions, please go ahead and be dropping those into the chat. Amber has some great information around some of ABB's programs, so I want to make sure she has time to share that with you. And both of our contact information is in the presentation as well if you have further questions.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I'll keep this short and sweet. I know I mentioned I run our intern program at ABB, and that is for year-round internships. We offer spring, fall, and full-time summer internships for all years and even into grad and PhD level. So reach out if you're interested in ABB. We hire across the entire organization. So whether you're, in more of a business-related role, engineering, who knows, right? We hire on all facets of the organization. So we do have a lot of great internship opportunities that we are now hiring for. Reach out to me if you have questions. We also are posted on your school postings as well as on careers.abb. So check those out. And then we have our Discovery program, which is our rotational program for after graduation. 2-year rotational program, awesome opportunity if you're about to graduate, but not sure quite what you want to do yet. Don't worry, I didn't either. Had to bump along the way, and a rotational program is a great way to really start building some roots at a company while still feeling that out a little bit and having some flexibility. So we do offer opportunities within both of these programs. We are interviewing for those right now all across the U.S. As you see this map with all of the fun little red dots, we're very heavy on the East Coast, Midwest, and then a little bit on the West Coast too. So Odds are, depending on your interest, as long as you're not up in that northwestern region, we'll have some flexibility for you in terms of location. So please reach out to me. Happy to give you more info on ABB as a whole, any of our programs, and share some information there with you as well.
Yeah, that's great. And just to sort of reinforce that from a recruiting perspective, so I've worked in employer relations and hiring. Rotational programs like that are a wonderful place to start your career. It's going to create a lot of potential job opportunities for you upon completion, likely within ABB, but it's also going to be something that's really marketable for your skills down the road. So don't sleep on that opportunity if you are going to be graduating next year, because those are really great places to get started in the professional world. And then just from our perspective in the Career Center, we have a few additional workshops coming up this week. We have one this afternoon on interview prep. We have some later in the week on overcoming imposter syndrome and navigating the workshop. You can scan the QR code there on the left for all of our upcoming workshops for the remainder of the semester. And if you have a couple minutes to fill out the workshop evaluation, the QR code on the right will link to that. We really appreciate getting your feedback on the information that we're providing to make sure that we are addressing all of your needs. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm sorry we've run over a few minutes, but we're so grateful to you, Amber, for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time today to share your perspective on this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Laura, and thank you all for attending as well and spending a couple extra minutes with us. It was a great conversation, and hope to hear or get some connections from you all soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.